Seasons. When you think of gardens, one of the most enticing is spring. And when you think of experiencing gardens in spring, you shouldn't miss the Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney. Established in 1816, it was Australia's first botanic garden, and as Executive Director Professor David Mabberley explains, its spring walk, first established in 1856, was the country's first.
It was set up within 40 years of our being established in 1816. We're just coming up to our bicentennial. And to have these tulips here are so symptomatic of spring, although of course we often think of them coming from Holland. But they only reached the rest of Western Europe via Holland because they originate in Central Asia. And they were introduced to Europe via Turkey. And the name tulip actually is from the Turkish word for a turban, because the Turks actually wore the flowers in their hats.
Tulips are now cultivated and grown en masse in large fields, but once they were incredibly valuable in more ways than one.
These became the kind of futures. It was because of gambling in the 17th century. It became known as tulipomania. And at one stage in the 1630s, a single bulb, which actually had not even been grown, was traded for equivalent of $1 million US today. During the Second World War, during the German occupation of the Netherlands, the poor people there, they had to turn to eating what was their source of revenue just to keep alive. And very unfortunately, a large diet of tulips can have some very unfortunate effects, particularly in women.
Apart from the tulips, there are many beautiful flowers to experience at the garden in spring.
Well, the Spring Walk is one of the great sights in the Sydney Garden, and I think everybody should be coming to have a look and see how it changes over time, because it's not static like everything in the garden. There is a continuous procession of different species, and we have plants from various different parts of the world, not just from Central Asia. Things like the almonds, of course, come from that part of the world, but many of the other plants are from North America or indeed from South Africa. So it's well worth coming to see it.
Royal Botanic Gardens horticulturalist Paul Nicholson said his team creates a seasonal display of 6,000 tulips, 2,000 other bulbs and about 5,000 annuals along the Spring Walk.
There's a mix of permanent and annual plantings here on the Spring Walk. Now the annual plantings, which comprise of mostly bulbs and some small flowering plants, they were planted in the first 2 weeks of June to flower in August and September.
It's hoped the Spring Walk will inspire the home gardener with ideas.
Look, for us, it's always great to have a bit of flamboyance in spring, and that's true for the home gardener. So things like tulips and pansies are wonderful performers in Sydney, but you have to replant them every year. But things like the ornamental flowering peach, the wisterias, and some of the rhododendrons we've got down here, they're terrific things for people to plant in a home garden if they've got a cool, moist spot.
There are good reasons why some plants are chosen over others.
Okay, we're looking at one of the rhododendrons that we selected here for the Spring Walk, and this is Rhododendron Cilia calyx, and this comes from southern China, and you can see it's got this beautiful white fragrant flower. And we chose these kind of rhododendrons for the Spring Walk because of their resistance to some of the diseases that affect azaleas, which is a type of rhododendron in Sydney. And here's another one, Veitchianum, that we also chose. So these were proven performers when we had issues with pests and diseases down here. So when we renovated the Spring Walk, we chose these kind of rhododendrons rather than the common azalea rhododendrons that you see in Sydney.
It's always helpful to get some tips about what you can do in the garden.
Okay, here we can see some of the annual and bulb plants that we put in for the spring display. And here we've got hyacinths, a few different colours of hyacinths, which again is a cool temperate bulb that needs chilling each year to flower properly. So these bulbs need to be placed in the crisper of a fridge for about 6 to 8 weeks to produce flowers in Sydney. And under planting the hyacinths, we've got these lovely blue pansies, which we use all the way down the Spring Walk, and then we have the really brightly coloured tulips and hyacinths emerging from this cool carpet of blue.
Well, spring for us arrives on the 1st of September, but as Aboriginal Education Officer Clarence Slockey explains, Indigenous seasons are quite different.
So for most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's about looking at the environment. And so environmental factors will play a large part in when those seasonal changes do come about. So for instance, at the moment, it is really quite warm and we're coming into the end of what we know as winter. So as an Aboriginal person and as someone who lives in Sydney, A lot of the east coast down into Victoria, they kind of recognise 5 or 6 seasons depending. So those 6 seasons aren't a set date on the lunar calendar.
Fran Jackson, manager, Royal Botanic Gardens, said for people who work or spend a lot of time outdoors, spring is in the air, just as Clarence said.
So Clarence's observations about Aboriginal seasons are very true in Sydney, especially. Realistically, if you work outside or even spend a lot of time outdoors, you'd know that we don't have any kind of relevance to European seasons here in Sydney. Sydney's climate is quite remarkable, particularly on the coast, particularly here at the Gardens. We've got quite a subtropical microclimate, and it means we can grow an enormous range of plants here. It means that we can have conifers from relatively cool areas sitting right next to fuchsias or begonias from relatively warm areas, sitting next to acacias from Central Australia. In some ways we have to be a bit careful about how we put plants together, but people do remark on it. People do say this is just astounding. We've never seen the kind of variety that you people can grow outside. We only ever see it in a glass house if we go, to a European botanic garden, or we don't see the range of cooler climate plants that can still grow here.
After you've experienced the spring walk, it's really worth exploring the rest of the garden as it sparkles like a jewel on the edge of Sydney Harbour.
One of the iconic plants in the Sydney Gardens is the canna lily, and we're standing here in front of a beautiful bank of red canna lilies looking out towards the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Sydney Opera House and Farm Cove down in the lower part of the gardens. And the canna lilies start flowering in springtime, but they'll flower all the way through summer right into early autumn. And they're one of the distinctive plants that gives Sydney its subtropical feel.
The herb garden will be awash with colour and perfused with aromas and perfumes from a multitude of plants, as horticulturalist Angela Matteo explains.
This herb garden is going to be an explosion of colour and smells and butterflies and all this abundance of wildlife that will come up with all these plantings that we have carried on during autumn, and even now in the spring. We just prepare a few beds with lots of annual plants, annual perennials like cosmos and queen anne lace that they will attract a lot of beneficial insects for the garden. So that's what you will see, lots of butterflies, lots of lady beetles, and hopefully not many aphids, which are the insect pests that hopefully all the beneficial insects will combat.
There's more to the design of the herb garden than what you'd think.
This herb garden was designed to show herbs or medicinal plants from all continents from the 5 continents. So we got Europe and Americas, and we got Asia, India, Africa, and also obviously Australia and the Pacific over there. And then we also have representation of culinary herbs and salad greens like lettuces, rocket, and then we also have insecticides. So it's how plants can be used to combat insects or mosquitoes or an insect repellent. We also have a display of perfumery, which is just displays basically a lot of plants that are used in the perfumery industry, like the damask roses, or we also have the pelargoniums, lemon verbena, essential oils that are used in nowadays in perfumery, and you'll be able to smell it when you come here in the spring.
There's wonderful things to see and experience at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney, this spring.
I think spring's just the best time to visit the Botanic Gardens. Generally in spring it's drier, so it's more reliably sunny. Everything's flowering. We have the most gorgeous spring display here, as you know. Our spring walk looks absolutely fabulous. Our acacia bed's looking really, really great. Our herb garden is just overflowing with herbs and flowers, and the whole place is full of scent, it's full of birds, it's full of everything's happening. It really is like new life again after winter. I mean, our winters aren't particularly cold, but I think that, a few things still go into hibernation here.
Don't forget, if you have a garden at home, the Sydney Royal Botanic Garden might provide some inspiration.
You come to Sydney, you can see the design elements and you can see the plant combinations that we use. And lots of plants have got labels on them, so take notes, take pen and a piece of paper and write them down. Go to your local nursery, or better still to the Growing Friends nursery right here in the gardens, and ask about, can you get hold of his plant?
Well, now you've seen a snapshot of what spring looks like at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Sydney. We hope to see you here to experience it for yourselves.
The 2012 Spring Walk is sponsored by Four Seasons Hotel Sydney. The hotel maintains a strong commitment to supporting sustainability and is pleased to partner with the Royal Botanic Gardens and Domain Trust, which shares common values surrounding the conservation of our natural environment.